How can digital tools, particularly those capable of processing vast amounts of text, augment our traditional humanities reading? What new insights can they provide, especially in the study of participatory cultures like fanfiction? Digital humanities is a growing interdisciplinary field that combines traditional humanities disciplines like history, literature, and philosophy with digital tools and methods. Digital humanists use technology to analyze, visualize, and interpret cultural data in new and exciting ways. In my own work as a digital humanist, I both use digital tools to answer humanistic questions and study new media and digital technologies themselves. Today, I want to focus on the first area, using digital tools to answer humanistic questions, particularly in the field of English literature. My own work on fanfiction draws from both traditional and digital methods. In English, we tend to ask qualitative rather than quantitative questions. We are often studying literature as an aesthetic or cultural product. We might look to the style of the text and its formal features to find how they are connected to its meaning. We might consider how a reader responds to the text and how different audiences interpret and engage with the work. Or we might take a historical or cultural view, taking into account the social and political context surrounding a text. We often engage in what we call close reading, meticulously analyzing the language and structure of a text to uncover deeper meanings and connections. Digital humanities tools work alongside these traditional methods and help us answer humanistic questions in new ways. These tools are especially helpful when it comes to reading large collections of texts or a corpus. Natural language processing uses machine learning to turn text into data that digital humanities scholars can analyze, showing changes in literature over time or finding new patterns in collections of texts. These kinds of tools are helpful in my work examining fanfiction. I look at fanfiction as a distinct kind of amateur writing that is a way for people to respond back to culture. Scholars understand fanfiction to be a form of participatory culture, in which we are not passive consumers of texts, but an active part of making meaning. Studying fanfiction can help us understand how fans don't merely consume something like a television series as it's given to them, but rewrite stories and characters for their own purposes. Rewriting stories from previous sources is a long-standing tradition in literature. You may have heard jokes that many classical works like Dante's Inferno are just Bible fanfiction, but most scholars in fan studies acknowledge this long tradition of reformulating older texts while locating the origins of contemporary fandom and fanfiction as we know it today to the 1960s and Star Trek. Fans, particularly women fans, wrote fanfiction stories that circulated in printed zines, creating communities through their shared love of the TV show. Today, the internet has made it easier for people to find communities and share stories with other fans. Because digital technologies have decreased the barriers to publishing, anyone can publish their fanfiction online. Many stories are housed in the Archive of Our Own, a digital archive established by a nonprofit and dedicated to the preserving and hosting of fanfiction stories. Here, you can find at least a few fanfiction stories for just about anything you can imagine. And for the bigger fandoms, there can be thousands, even hundreds of thousands of these stories. Scholars like me do want to know what's happening in these stories in service of the same humanistic questions we might ask of any other more traditional text. What are some recurring themes, and what do they tell us about this community? What can these stories tell us about the complicated nature of reception and participatory culture? We could read a few stories from a fandom and start to get some idea of how fans read and write, and this is a great place to start any study of a fandom and where I always begin. This is in line with the traditional close reading methodology of literary studies. But needless to say, no one person can read any substantive number of these stories. Here's where digital humanities methodologies can be powerful. They can help us analyze a fanfiction corpus at scale. Let's take a case study, the fandom for the very popular show Supernatural. Running for 15 seasons, it racked up a dedicated fan base over that time, creating a fandom that was incredibly prevalent in fan spaces. Natural language processing is incredibly helpful here, because there are almost 300,000 stories in the fandom. The first step in a fanfiction text analysis project like this is data collection. I created a corpus of all the texts I studied, made sure they were cleaned and readable to the computer, and ensured I had all the metadata that I wanted. Fanfiction is relatively easy data for text analysis. Because it is what we would call born digital or native to the internet, it is already digitized for us. My final corpus contained 4,000 of the most popular stories in the Supernatural fandom as cleaned text files. Using the Duke compute cluster, I used an NLP program called BookNLP to read all of my stories, resulting in rich textual data that can then be analyzed in a number of ways. In a chapter of my dissertation, I used this fandom case study to examine how fans fictionalize real people by comparing the similarities and differences between stories about characters and stories fans write about the actors who play the characters. I focused on the ways the bodies of the characters are written, The data I gathered with the assistance of the digital tools helped me to theorize that the body of the actor is a point of continuity for fans. My analysis of the slippage between the real and imagined has larger implications for discussions about fictionality and referentiality in literary studies more broadly. But fanfiction can tell us many things about audience reception. What about the setting of the stories? In our code-along video, my colleague Prakar and I show you how to map spatial data offered by these stories using AI to help us predict where a story is set.